My sister stole my fiancé to inherit our grandfather's vineyard. I let them have the wedding, then read the will that proved they inherited $5 million in debt. The invitation sat on my granite countertop like a poisoned apple. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with gold leaf edges. Vanessa's signature, quiet luxury style, paid for with money she didn't have. Vanessa and Mark, 2 souls, 1 vineyard. Mark was my fiancé 6 months ago. We were supposed to be married in a small courthouse ceremony, but Vanessa, with her carefully curated Instagram life and her model off-duty aesthetic, decided she wanted a husband who looked good in photos. She didn't just take him, she staged a discovery where my parents found them together, and suddenly I was the bitter one for being upset. My mother told me to be the bigger person and attend. What they didn't know was that being the bigger person gave me a front row seat to their destruction. My grandfather, Silas, was a man of the earth and many secrets. He passed away 3 months ago, just as Vanessa and Mark were announcing their engagement. Everyone assumed Silas was worth tens of millions because of the Vance Vineyard, one of the most prestigious estates in Napa. Vanessa spent her childhood playing Princess of the Vines, while I spent my summers in Silas's dusty office, learning the difference between a liability and an asset. Before he died, Silas made me the sole executor of his estate. He told me that, Clara, the world looks at the grapes, you look at the roots. When I opened his private ledger after the funeral, I realized the roots were rotten. The vineyard hadn't made a profit in 7 years. It was a tax shelter propped up by massive high-interest loans, and Vanessa was about to marry right into the middle of it. Vanessa called me a week before the wedding. No hello, no how are you. Just a demand. Clara, I need you to sign over the temporary deed for the vineyard so we can have the reception in the barrel room. The caterers need proof of ownership for the insurance. I looked at the documents on my desk. If I signed that temporary deed, I was technically giving her possession without ownership, a legal distinction she was too vain to understand. I'll have the papers ready by the rehearsal dinner, Vanessa, I said, my voice as smooth as glass. Good, she huffed. And try to wear something that doesn't wash you out. Mark says you've been looking tired. I smiled at the phone. I wasn't tired, I was energized. I was about to give her exactly what she asked for, the keys to a sinking ship. I ran into Mark at a local coffee shop 3 days before the wedding. He looked stressed. The tan he'd gotten in the Maldives was fading, replaced by a gray pallor. Clara, he whispered, looking over his shoulder. I hope you know this wasn't personal. Vanessa she understands the lifestyle I need for my firm. Mark was an investment banker who had recently lost his biggest client. He wasn't marrying Vanessa for her personality. He was marrying the Vance Vineyard heiress to keep his firm afloat. He thought Silas's money would be his bailout. I understand perfectly, Mark, I said, taking a slow sip of my black coffee. You've always been a man who follows the money. I hope the inheritance is everything you've dreamed of. He didn't catch the irony. He just nodded, relieved that I wasn't making a scene. He had no idea he was trading a life raft for a lead weight. The rehearsal dinner was held at a 5-star restaurant. My father stood up, glass raised, beaming at Vanessa. To my beautiful daughter, who will carry the Vance legacy into the next generation on our glorious vineyard. Vanessa looked at me and winked, holding out her hand for the papers I'd promised. I handed her a sleek leather folder. Inside wasn't just the temporary deed, it was a management assumption agreement. By signing it to get her insurance, she was legally agreeing to take over all operating costs of the vineyard effective immediately. Just sign the highlighted sections, V, I whispered. It's just standard procedure for the estate. She signed it without reading a single word, too busy waving to a photographer she'd hired to document the intimate moment. She had just signed away her right to sue me for what was coming next. That night, I went to the vineyard alone. I stood in the barrel room, which had been draped in thousands of dollars of white silk and orchids. It looked beautiful, but I could smell the truth. The dampness in the walls, the aging equipment that hadn't been serviced in years. Silas had left a letter of intent in his safe, meant to be read only after the wedding. It stated that the vineyard was to be gifted to the grandchild who cherished the land. Vanessa took that to mean her, but Silas's definition of cherishing the land was protecting it from those who would exploit it. He had left me the liquid reserves, the only actual cash in the family, $8 million in a private trust that no one knew existed. He left Vanessa the land, the beautiful, prestigious $5 million in debt land. I was the rich sister in the background. She was the famous debtor in the spotlight. The morning of the wedding was a whirlwind of hairspray and fake laughter. I sat in the corner of the bridal suite, acting the part of the dutiful sister. My mother kept handing me tissues, assuming I was crying because I was heartbroken. It's okay to be sad, Clara, she whispered. Mark was a good man, but Vanessa is a star. I let a single tear fall. You're right, Mom. She really is going to be the center of attention today. Vanessa was complaining that the vintage champagne wasn't cold enough. I can't wait until tomorrow, she snapped at a bridesmaid. When I'm officially the boss here, I'm firing the entire cellar staff. They're incompetent. She didn't realize that by tomorrow she wouldn't be able to afford the electricity to keep the champagne cold, let alone a staff. The ceremony was held at sunset, overlooking the rolling hills of the Vineyard. It looked like a movie. When the officiant asked if anyone had any objections, the silence was heavy. I looked at Mark. He was staring at the horizon, likely calculating the value of the land in his head. I do, I whispered to myself, but not loud enough for anyone to hear. I didn't object to the marriage. I objected to the lie. They exchanged vows of richer or poorer. I almost laughed at the poorer part. They were about to find out exactly how much they could endure. When they were pronounced husband and wife, a roar of applause went up. The Vance power couple was official. Vanessa leaned into Mark, whispering something about their new empire. I checked my watch. The legal cooling-off period for the will ended in exactly 2 hours. The reception was a display of grotesque wealth. Caviar stations, a 10-tier cake, and a famous jazz band. Vanessa was in her second dress, a $20,000 silk gown, twirling under the chandeliers. I sat at the family table next to the estate's lead accountant, Mr. Henderson. He looked at me with a grim expression. Are you sure about this, Clara? Once I hand over the daily operating report to the new owners, there's no going back. They wanted the legacy, Mr. Henderson, I said. And the legacy is a ledger, handed over during the speeches. Mark was already talking to a group of developers in the corner, gesturing toward the north fields. He was trying to sell off parts of the land before the honeymoon. Little did he know, the land was collateral for a loan that was currently in default. My father stood up for the final toast. And now for the most important part of the evening. My daughter Clara, as the executor of Silas's estate, has an announcement regarding the future of this magnificent vineyard. The room went quiet. Vanessa and Mark stood up, beaming, ready to receive their crown. I walked up to the microphone, the leather folder in my hand. I didn't look like the overlooked sister anymore. I looked like a woman holding a match to a paper house. Grandfather Silas loved this land, I began, my voice steady, and he wanted to ensure that its future was handled by those who truly understood its value. Vanessa, Mark, please come forward. They stepped up, glowing with greed. I handed them the official debt disclosure tucked inside a gold-trimmed envelope. Congratulations. You are now the sole owners of Vance Vineyard, and every single one of its liabilities. The ballroom, which seconds ago was vibrating with jazz and laughter, became so quiet I could hear the wind whistling through the aging eaves of the barn. Vanessa held the gold-trimmed envelope as if it were a holy relic. Mark was grinning, a rehearsed politician-style smile, waiting for me to say the words, multi-million-dollar trust. Clara, stop being so dramatic, Vanessa laughed, though her voice had a sharp edge of nerves. Just tell them the number. How much did Silas leave us for the renovations? I adjusted the microphone, the feedback whining slightly. There is no money for renovations, Vanessa. The number you're looking for is on page 3 of the disclosure. It's negative $5,400,000. That is the current debt load of the Vance Vineyard, which, as of 10 minutes ago, is officially your personal responsibility. The smile on Mark's face didn't fade. It froze. It was the look of a man who had just stepped off a cliff and hadn't realized the ground was gone. Mark was the first to move. He snatched the papers from Vanessa's hand, his eyes scanning the spreadsheets with the frantic speed of an investment banker looking for a loophole. I watched his pupils dilate as he saw the signatures. Silas's signature was there, yes, but so was Vanessa's. What is this? Mark hissed, his voice cracking. Vanessa, what did you sign at the rehearsal dinner? Vanessa was shaking, her $20,000 dress suddenly looking like a shroud. Clara said it was for the insurance, for the catering. It was a management assumption agreement, I said, stepping closer to them so the guests could hear every word. By signing it, you bypassed the estate's protection. You didn't wait for the probate period to end. You jumped the gun to show off your ownership to your friends. In doing so, you accepted the liabilities as personal debt rather than estate debt. You're not just the owners, Mark, you're the guarantors. My father stepped forward, his face a mask of confusion. Clara, surely this is a mistake. Silas was a wealthy man. Where is the cash? Where are the liquid assets? I looked at my father, the man who had told me to be the bigger person while my sister stole my life. The liquid assets were left to the grandchild who spent her weekends actually working the books, Dad. Silas knew Vanessa only loved the label on the bottle. He left the wine to her and the cellar to me. A guest in the back, a prominent developer Mark had been courting, let out a low whistle. Defaulted loans, Mark, and you were trying to sell me a partnership 10 minutes ago? That's securities fraud, buddy. The developers began to exit the room, their silk-lined jackets rustling like dry leaves. The Vance power couple was becoming radioactive in real time. The jazz band, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stopped playing mid-note. The expensive flowers seemed to wilt under the harsh truth. Vanessa finally found her voice, a high-pitched shriek that echoed off the barrel-aged walls. You did this, you're jealous. You're trying to ruin my wedding because Mark chose me. Mark didn't choose you, Vanessa. I said, my voice calm and clinical. Mark chose a balance sheet he didn't bother to audit. And you chose a husband you had to steal to feel powerful. You both got exactly what you wanted. You wanted the vineyard? It's yours. Every rotting vine, every broken tractor, and every past due notice. Mark turned to Vanessa, and for the first time, I saw the look of pure, unadulterated loathing in his eyes. This wasn't the look of a husband. It was the look of a man who realized he'd been scammed by a star. As if on cue, the reality of negative $5 million hit the staff. The head caterer, a stern woman who had been promised a massive tip, marched up to the head table. If the vineyard is in default, who is paying for the 5-course meal in the open bar tonight? She demanded. My contract is with the owners of Vance Vineyard. That's you, isn't it? She pointed her finger at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at Mark. Mark looked at his wallet. The liquid cash he had was tied up in his failing firm. He had been counting on the inheritance to pay for the wedding itself. I will settle it Monday, Mark stammered. No, the caterer said, pulling out a tablet. The contract says payment due upon change of ownership or conclusion of event. The ownership changed tonight. I need a credit card that won't bounce, or I'm calling the sheriff for theft of services. I walked over to the bar and ordered a glass of the most expensive vintage Silas had ever produced, one of the few bottles that wasn't tied up in the debt. I toasted my own reflection in the mirror behind the bar. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my private bank account. The $8 million from Silas's secret trust had just cleared. I was now the wealthiest person in the family, and the only one who didn't have a camera crew documenting my lifestyle. My mother approached me, her eyes red with tears. Clara, how could you be so cruel? This was her day. Mom, you told me to be the bigger person, I reminded her. The bigger person pays the bills. Since I'm not the owner, I don't have to pay for a single orchid at this wedding. Vanessa and Mark are the big people now. Let them handle it. Mark followed me to the bar. His tie loosened, his forehead slick with sweat. Clara, listen, we can fix this. You're the executor. You can move the funds. You can recharacterize the debt. If you help me, I can get back with you. Vanessa, she's nothing. She's just a pretty face with a signed confession. I'll leave her tonight. I looked at him, the man I once thought I would spend my life with. He was so transparent, so fundamentally broken by his own greed. Mark, I said, leaning in close so only he could hear. I'm a lawyer. I don't characterize debt, I enforce it. And as for leaving Vanessa, don't bother. You two deserve each other. You're both ghosts haunting a dead vineyard. Enjoy the honeymoon. I hear the bank is seizing the Maldives tickets tomorrow morning. By 11 p.m., the wedding of the year had turned into a flea market. Guests were leaving with centerpieces and bottles of wine, sensing that the bill would never be paid. The band had packed up and left. I stood by the door as the sheriff arrived, not to arrest anyone, but to serve the formal notice of default on the property. Because Vanessa had signed the assumption agreement, the bank was moving for an expedited foreclosure. Who is the responsible party? The officer asked. I pointed to the couple standing in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by half-eaten cake and wilted flowers. The bride and groom, I said. They're the ones in charge now? I woke up the next morning in a luxury hotel suite, miles away from the vineyard. I scrolled through social media. Vanessa had deleted her Instagram. The Vineyard Princess was trending, but for all the wrong reasons. A local news site had a headline, Vance Vineyard wedding ends in process service. The comments were brutal. People who had been jealous of Vanessa's perfect life were now reveling in her fall. Mark's firm had issued a statement saying he was on indefinite leave. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I wasn't the overlooked sister anymore. I was the architect of a new life. I had a trust fund, a law degree, and no fiancé to hold me back. I met with Mr. Henderson, the accountant, at a quiet diner. He handed me the final papers for the estate. You know, Clara, he said, Silas knew this would happen. He told me Vanessa would try to steal the crown, so he made sure the crown was made of lead. He knew I'd take the revenge, didn't he? I asked. He knew you'd take the justice, Henderson corrected. Now, what are you going to do with $8 million and a law degree? I looked out the window at the distant hills of Napa. I'm going to buy the debt, I said. I'm going to wait for the bank to foreclose on Vanessa and Mark. I'm going to buy the vineyard for pennies on the dollar, clear the land, and build something that actually grows. The revenge wasn't over. The sabotage was just the first phase. Now, it was time for the acquisition. 3 weeks after the wedding, the golden couple was living in a nightmare of their own making. Because Vanessa had signed the management assumption agreement, the bank didn't just target the vineyard, they went after her personal assets. Since she had no income and Mark's bank accounts were already flagged for his firm's internal investigation, the dominoes fell fast. I watched from my high-rise office as the notice of sale was posted on the vineyard gates. Vanessa called me 30 times that day. I finally picked up on the 31st. Clara, please, she sobbed. They're taking my car. They're taking Mom's jewelry that I borrowed for the wedding. You have to use the trust money to bail us out. We're family. Family doesn't steal fiancés, Vanessa, I said, my voice cold and rhythmic. And family doesn't sign legal legal documents without reading them. You wanted the lifestyle of an heiress? This is the reality of the business you inherited. It's not my job to subsidize your ignorance. Mark's fall was even more spectacular. His firm, realizing he had attempted to solicit investment partnerships for a property that was in active default, conducted a full audit of his previous deals. They found irregularities in how he handled my accounts when we were together. He hadn't just cheated on me emotionally, he had been skimming small percentages of my managed funds to pay for Vanessa's influencer lifestyle. I didn't have to lift a finger. The firm fired him for cause, and the SEC opened a preliminary inquiry. He was blacklisted from every major bank in the country. He went from a high-flying investment banker to a man who couldn't get a job as a bank teller. He had traded a woman who understood his career for a woman who ended it. My parents were forced to pick a side. My mother tried to guilt me into sharing the $8 million trust. It's what Silas would have wanted, Clara. He wouldn't want to see his daughter on the street. Silas left me the money specifically because he knew you and Dad would waste it on Vanessa's vanity, I told her. If you want to help her, sell your house, but don't look at my ledger. I am the executor, not a charity. My father, realizing I held all the cards, finally went quiet. He saw the daughter he had overlooked for 30 years, and for the first time, he was afraid of me. He realized the quiet sister was the only one with the power to keep the family from total bankruptcy. The day of the public auction for Vance Vineyard was a cold, gray morning. I arrived in a black SUV, wearing a tailored suit that cost more than Vanessa's remaining wardrobe. Vanessa and Mark were there, standing by the gates, looking like ghosts. They were hoping a developer would buy the land and perhaps keep them on as consultants. The bidding started at $3 million, the value of the primary debt. No one moved. The developers I had spoken to earlier knew the soil was depleted and the equipment was junk. They stayed silent. $3 million going once, the auctioneer called. $3 million, I said, raising my hand. Vanessa gasped, her eyes widening. Clara, you're buying it for us? No, Vanessa, I said, looking her in the eye. I'm buying it for myself. The gavel fell. For $3.1 million, I was the sole owner of the Vance Vineyard, free and clear of all previous encumbrances. I walked up to the gates where Mark and Vanessa stood. Mark tried to put on his old charming face. Clara, look, I know I messed up, but with your money and my knowledge of the markets, we can turn this place around. Let's talk in private. I handed him a manila envelope. There's nothing to talk about, Mark. This is a formal eviction notice. You have 2 hours to remove your personal belongings from the main house. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property and will be incinerated. You can't do this, Vanessa shrieked. I can, I'm the landlord now, and I don't rent to people who breach contracts or trust. I watched from the porch as Mark and Vanessa loaded their lives into a rented U-Haul. Vanessa was crying over a box of silk shoes that were stained with vineyard mud. Mark was arguing with the movers because he couldn't afford their fee. I saw the $20,000 wedding dress stuffed into a black trash bag. It was the perfect symbol for their marriage. Expensive, performative, and ultimately disposable. As they drove out of the gates, Mark looked back at me. I didn't wave. I just stood there, the owner of the land he had tried to steal, watching him disappear into the dust of his own making. I didn't keep the vineyard as it was. I spent the next year using Silas's trust to perform a total environmental audit. I cleared out the diseased vines and replaced them with sustainable organic crops, renovated the barrel room into a high-end educational center for female entrepreneurs and estate lawyers. The Vance Vineyard name was scrubbed. I renamed it the Silas and Clara Estate. It wasn't a place for influencer weddings anymore. It was a place of business and legacy. My mother and father were allowed to visit, but only as guests. They had to sign in at the gate like everyone else. I heard through the grapevine that Mark was working as a junior insurance solicitor in a strip mall 3 states away. He was living in a 1-bedroom apartment and taking the bus to work. Vanessa had left him 6 months after the eviction, the moment she realized there was no hidden gold coming. She had tried to sue me for emotional distress and a rightful share of the inheritance. I represented myself in court. The judge dismissed her case in 10 minutes and ordered her to pay my legal fees. Since she couldn't pay, I placed a lien on her future earnings. Every time she earns $1 as a content creator, a percentage comes to me. I literally own her future. Vanessa is now a cautionary tale in the social circles she once dominated. She tries to post about starting over and finding her truth, but her comments are flooded with people asking about the $5.4 million debt and the sister she betrayed. She reached out to me one last time, asking for a job at the estate. I know the land, Clara. I could be the face of the brand. I replied with a single sentence. The brand is built on integrity. You would be a liability. I blocked her number. She was no longer a star. She was just a background character in the story of my success. It's been 2 years since the wedding sabotage. I'm sitting on the porch of the main house, looking out over the healthy green rows of the new estate. I have a new fiancé, a man who is a structural engineer. He doesn't care about my balance sheet. He cares about the foundation of our relationship. The overlooked sister is now the one everyone watches. I didn't just sabotage a wedding. I audited a family and found them wanting. I took the ruins they left behind and built a fortress. As the sun sets over the vines, I raise a glass of the first new vintage. It tastes like victory. It tastes like justice. It tastes like home.